Okay, so I was asked to do a tutorial on some of these pictures that I've been doing recently. They are kind of a Halloween harvesty thing. So there's the first one I did, the second one, and then the third one. And so this is kind of like a paint night, I guess, kind of thing. So I'm going to do another one, and this one, so you can see I did an owl, and I did a scarecrow, and I did a cat. This one I might do a pumpkin patch. I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do, but I'll show you the basics of how to do it. And a silhouette, you can choose whichever silhouette you want to do. I like the trees, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, so what I'm using is an 8x8 block of watercolor paper, and this is Arches. I like this, it's 100% cotton, it holds the water well, and I like the size, and I like that it's glued down on the edges so that it doesn't move and I don't have to tape it down necessarily. I'm also using lamp black for the majority of it, and you can just use lamp black if you want, and just leave it black. If you'll notice on these there's a little bit of color because I like a little bit of color. I'm going to use the Prussian blue for this one. The other one I used a little bit of a lighter blue, but I like the stark blue. I also have my water, and I have, to begin with, I have a size 12 paintbrush for the washes and things, and then later we'll change to a smaller paintbrush for the silhouette type things. So the first thing that we're going to do is, actually I'm going to fold this back, it's easier to work with, is wet the paper. And I don't want it to be like soaking wet, but I do want it to be shiny. You don't want puddles. If you're working with a loose piece of paper, you need to tape it down to something like a piece of cardboard or something with some masking tape before you start, otherwise you'll end up with buckling paper. But just get it all wet. And then once it's wet, we're going to have to work somewhat quickly to get our moon. And this is going to be fairly loose, and so we're not looking for a lot of detail here. Your moon doesn't have to be perfectly round. Your silhouette doesn't have to look exactly. Silhouettes are nice because they don't look exactly all the time, but they're pretty easy to do. You don't have to have a lot of detail in them. Okay. So I have no puddles. I'm just going to tip it in the light. There's a dry spot right there. Make sure I don't have any dry spots so that it's shiny. I don't know if you can see that on the camera, but it's shiny except for that one edge. And it's pretty covered. There's no puddles anywhere on the edges or anything. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take my black and I'm going to do the corners. I just want just enough water to activate the paint, but don't thin it. Okay, and I'm going to do kind of a round, you know, the moon is round, and come down about where I want the moon. It's probably not going to be quite that big, but to start with, and there's plenty of water on the paper, so you don't need to add extra water. I'm going to turn this to make it easier. When you do dip in the water, just wipe as much as you can off. And I'm going to start coming down a little bit. I don't want my moon quite that big. Now here's where if you want to start adding some other color, so I want this blue. Again, enough water to activate it, but I want some pretty dark color. And I'm actually going to go back up into the corners, just pull that down a little bit. Just need more. You're going to want your moon pretty much in the center. Usually you don't want focal points in the center, but this is actually not the focal point because we're going to have the silhouette is the focal point, and it's not going to be right in the center. Okay. Rinse that out, and I'm going to go back to my black, but I don't necessarily need it quite so dark, so I'm going to get a little bit more water, kind of go back over that a little bit, and start bringing it in to about the shape that I want. My moon to be. And it doesn't matter if it goes into the moon, it's all right. This is, like I said, fairly loose. More black. Okay, now I'm going to start kind of tightening up with just water, not a lot though, my shape of my moon. And I am dabbing my paper towel a little bit. I think I want more color over here. And we want it to bleed into the moon, so don't worry about that. Just make sure you have something somewhat round. And then the moon obviously has craters and things, so add a little bit. You don't want to add a lot. And actually I'm going to moisten the center of my moon again because it's dry. Again, you don't want puddles. And I'm just going to take a really light, just a little bit of the black, and just start adding kind of the craters and things. Maybe a little bit of blue here and there. But again, you don't want too much color here. And don't worry, we're going to tighten up the form of that moon in a little bit. This side, I want more black though. Okay, and you want that lighter color around the outside of the moon because there is a little bit of light the moon reflects. Make sure your shape is what you want it, and then we're going to just let that dry. You don't want to mess with it too much at this point in time because if I start getting more water on here, it's going to start giving me blooms, and I don't want blooms. So we're going to leave that and we're going to let it dry, and then we'll come back. Okay, so I'm sitting here watching this as it dries and it's kind of creeping in, so I'm going to take my dry brush. I mean, it's damp, but I wiped it on a paper towel. I'm just going to pull around the edge so it's got a little bit more of an edge to it. Kind of lifting some of the paint back off. And actually, I'll tell you, I like this lighter side, and I'll tell you why when I get to the point of painting it, and this darker side. So that looks pretty good. So now I'm gonna really not touch it and leave it alone. All right, so this is all dry, and you'll notice that it dried a lot lighter, so don't be afraid to go pretty dark with your colors. Depending on your picture, you may want to leave it like that. Some of these are fairly light. This one is a lot darker around the edges, so it just depends on the kind of the effect that you're looking for. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to work on the moon. I'm going to switch to a smaller brush, a size 8, just so that I have a little bit more control. Same colors are lamp black and Prussian blue, or if you want to do like a purple color, that'd be cool too. You can see there are a few little blooms, but I don't mind that because light kind of radiates out, and so I kind of like how that ended up, and they all kind of end up differently. If you look at these, kind of how they end up, this one's a little more light around it, you know, anyway. So it doesn't, don't worry if yours doesn't look exactly like mine. Okay, so what we're going to do, whoops, I think I bumped the camera. We are going to work on the moon area, and you'll see I put in those blues and those grays, and they've almost completely disappeared, and I want those back in there. So I'm going to get some clean water, and the moon has the sun shining on it. Now you can leave it all the way light like this, but I kind of like to have, look back at these, kind of a shadow area on one side and a lighter area on the other side, just because it gives a little bit of variety. So that's what I'm going to do right now. So this is right side up, and this side is going to be my shadow area. So I'm going to work on that right now, and I'm going to go right along that edge and wet it with clean water. Don't use your dirty water. And I'm not going to get the whole thing wet. I'm just going to kind of do an area. And I want to go on that edge there because I want that to be in the moon, not outside of it. You can choose for yours. Then I'm going to use very light, watery gray. You can't see that in there, but it's fairly light. And then we're just going to paint that in there. And remember, the moon is not completely gray. And I'm going to just take a little bit, I just like to add a little bit of blue in there just to keep that blue kind of going throughout. Look at it. I want it to come up a little bit farther. Make sure you maintain that round. And see how out here it's not wet, because I didn't wet it, just kind of wet it down. But it can be a hard edge too, it doesn't have to be completely soft. I'm going to rub that a little bit more and kind of come around, maintaining that circle. I'm going to soften out some of those edges there just with a little bit more water, but it doesn't have to be really soft because the moon has craters and things like that. And then I'm going to come out just a little bit to get my circle. And that edge, I'm not going to worry about that little sunbursty effect there, it's fine. I want a little bit more blue over here, and then a little bit more of the gray. And remember, it's going to dry a lot lighter, especially where it's wet. Okay, I'm going to keep coming around, but I'm going to get lighter and lighter as I come around, back to just that clean water. And I want to add some, you know, some color up in here, color around, because, you know, you can see the craters no matter where they are. But remember that the moon is not necessarily the focal point. Okay, so make it round, make it look kind of nice, and then we'll leave it be. And I'm going to add just a touch more gray kind of down through here, just to separate this edge, even though that's my light side. And then I'm just going to kind of feather that out into there. A little bit more blues, a little bit more grays, a little bit more water. So I kind of like that. Except for, I want this one edge, it kind of comes in at a funny angle. So we'll widen that out just a little bit. So then I would recommend that you kind of step back and look at it. Make sure it's round or pretty round. Like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect, but kind of round. And there's the moon. And you have the light coming off of it on this side. This side is the lighter side, obviously. If you want to add, I'm going to add just a little bit more dark down here. I want a little bit more depth on that side. But you also need to know when to stop fiddling. And I think I'm about to that point. Okay, now at this point you need to kind of decide what you're going to do for your silhouettes and have some idea. You may need a reference photo, things like that. So get that ready. Add a little bit more dark along that edge. I'm going to call that good. So I'm going to let that dry, and then we'll come back and we'll do our silhouette. And you can dry these things with a hair dryer. One thing to be conscientious about is not blow drying, like especially on this first coat, blow drying the color into your moon. If you are going to do a hair dryer, just be really careful because it can move the paint on the paper. And that's not what you want on this one, because you want that splayed out kind of look. I guess if you held it straight down so it's pushing it all out, that would be okay. If you want to, at this point in time, if you were wanting to darken up the background at all, like this one, I went over that area twice. You can do that. I actually kind of like where this one is at, so I'm going to leave it, and then we'll be back in just a minute. Okay, this having dried, I decided I wanted a little bit more color and shadow over on this side of my moon. You can do this, you don't have to. If you have enough, don't worry about it. I'm not going to do it very wet. But I'm going to come in with a somewhat darker, and then I'm going to wet my brush with just clean water, and I'm just going to move that out and around. I'm going to take some blue, because I also didn't think there was enough blue. And the moon has a lot of dips and things, so don't worry about it looking choppy and patchy, because that's kind of how the moon looks anyway. I'm going to bring a little bit more out into here. Soften that a little bit over there. And these little white flecks, leave those there. Don't paint over everything. You want this to be really kind of organic feeling, but you want it to be very, see how it kind of adds a little bit of interest to the moon there. I'm going to smooth that out, just because I didn't like that hard line in particular, but so there we go. And now I'm going to let that dry really quick, but this won't take very long to dry, and then we'll go on with the silhouette.